Alright, in this video I'm going to show how to do a simple setup for a parent-child relationship with three meshes, simple meshes, in this case being boxes, and how to link them to point objects or helper objects, which we will use as the bones to actually set keyframes and animate them to where they move around the central mesh, in that case being this one, which I have named root. So this one I'll go ahead and name root mesh, as you can see right up here. And from this, I'm going to go ahead and go to top view by hitting T, hit S to turn on my snap tool, and I'm going to hold down shift and make two copies of it. But instead of this one being called root mesh, I'm going to name it child mesh 001. And that way this next one, shift copy over, will go ahead and be named child mesh 002. Now as we set up things for animating, we don't necessarily select these objects to rotate these or to move these for animation purposes. You can, it's just not the practice that we usually use. And the reason for that being is that we just do not want to add keyframes to our actual mesh. You know, it saves you trouble in the long run, trust me. So with this said, I'm going to go ahead and for this point be working in wireframe view, and I'm going to go ahead and work in top view. So I'm going to hit T to go back to top view, and I'm going to select over here and go back to wireframe. Now with this tab up here, you'll notice with our set of 3ds Max tabs we have create, modify, hierarchy, motion, display, and utilities. I'm going to be working in the hierarchy tab just to make sure that the pivot points are centered to the object that I have. Now when you actually set up an object, you know the pivot point may not be dead center, so I'll just by chance go ahead and make another one here, another box, and I will make it squared, so 50 by 50 by 50. Now this is for example purposes, just to show you that it may not be in the dead center of your mesh. Go ahead and add a material to this, and turn on my edge faces by hitting F4 on my computer here, keyboard. And you can notice that the pivot point is not dead center. It's actually in the middle, or the middle of the bottom of the actual object. So with these previous ones that I created, you'll notice that the pivot point is in the center of the object. And so we want to make sure that your pivot point is set up in the center. So that being the case, when you create one of these squares or whatever objects you choose to use, there's a little thing over here that is called the hierarchy tab, and we click that, and we want to click effect pivot only. By clicking this, it enables you to actually change manually or have 3D Max change where your pivot point is. So that being the case, I want it to center it to this object, so it's very simple. I just click center to object. Now I can continue to work here, but the main thing I really need to do is turn off the effect pivot only, which is found up here. So I'm going to turn that off. I'm going to go ahead and delete this sphere because that was an that box because it was an example. And I'm going to go ahead and select these spheres, or these boxes again. So working back in top view, I'm going to work in wireframe mode. If you can see all those, I'll go ahead and change the color of the wireframes just so you can see it a bit easier. Let's go ahead and make it like a red color. I'll still not be able to be seen, so let's make it maybe a fluorescent green. There we go. I'll turn off the grid here. Now I'm in top view, and you can tell by working right over here that I'm in top view. So while being in top view, the one thing I want to do is I want to go ahead and create a point object or a helper object. In this case, we're going to name them bone objects by clicking on this thing called, there's a little tape measure up here in your utilities. It's called helpers. So when you click here, you have different types. You have dummy objects, which actually look like little boxes. You have what are called crowd objects to control multiple things at once. Exposure TMs, don't want to get into that. Points, protractors, compasses, tape measure, grids, delegates, and containers. Well, there's a lot of helper objects there, and they can be used anything from animation to measuring to architecture to design to everything. But they're also capable of being moved in 3D space, as you can see right here, because they do actually have 3D space. Alright, so let's get Control Z a few times to get rid of these. But is what I'm going to focus on and go ahead and create are these things called point objects. And I'm going to turn my grid back on, and I'm going to create a grid in the center right here by hitting S. I'll turn on my snap, and I'll go back to front view, and you notice that the point object that I did create is in the dead center of the grid. It's at 000. So that being the case, I need to access the properties of the actual point helper I created. Now I like to actually put different aesthetics onto this within the parameters of the helper object, and that case this being a point object, and I actually create a box around it. That way it enables me to actually see and select the box there. Now by default you'll notice it's fairly small, and I'll go ahead and expand it out to where it actually encompasses the actual mesh that I have, so it looks something like this. I don't normally work this way, it's just easy for instances like this to be able to select the helper object without selecting the box, and I'll get to that also in a little bit. So that being the case, back to wireframe view. This time I'm going to be in front view, so I hit F, and you'll notice that when I created this, the name of it is 0.001. Well, one thing I want to add to this is I want to make sure that I name this root, because this is the central bone which the other ones will be based off of. So the other ones, when they rotate, will rotate around this central one, and when they are moved, when the root bone is moved, we will actually be able to move all other bones and meshes that are connected to it. So this one, it is named root. I'm going to go ahead and hold down shift. Again, I'm going to turn on snap by hitting S on my keyboard, and I'm going to hold down shift to make a copy of it, and I'm just going to go ahead and put it around this one. This one cannot be named root. It cannot be named root at all. This one we have to name them in all caps, B-O-N-E 1, bone 1. Okay, because that's how we're going to do this. Because the bones are connected to the root. Think of them as, you know, a skeleton almost that we're making, which would be more complex things we'll get to later on in the semester, but right now this is just how we're going to set it up. And I'm going to make another copy of that. I'm going to turn on shift again. Just hold down shift, make another copy, bone 002. Good. I also noticed that I accidentally hit a little S on the end of mine there. Okay, so that brings us to that. I'm going to hit P, go back to perspective view, turn on everything. Now you'll notice I have everything selected here. So I have 3 meshes, 3 point helpers, and that is going to be the basics for setting up a simple parent-child relationship when it comes to simple animation. And this is animation that is primarily based on things like mechanical. I mentioned last week in class we're going to be doing a Ferris wheel and everything, and that is exactly what it is. But also the parent-child relationships is also used in organic animation, such as characters, let's say a tree moving in the wind and things like that. So it's pretty much the same. I'm just giving you the basics of how to set this stuff up and what the principles are behind setting those up. So with that being the case, the next thing we need to do is I'm just going to go ahead and hold down Control, and I'm going to select just the bone objects, and I'm going to hit Alt Q on my keyboard to isolate just them. So now these are not the meshes themselves, these are those individual point objects we created, and you'll see as I pick them here, bone 01, root, and bone 02. Now these are going to be the children of the parented object here. So just so you'll understand what the difference is, I'm going to leave the root this green color, but I'm going to go ahead and select the 2 children and change their color. And I'm going to go ahead and make them a yellow. So actually that's not much of a change, so I'll go ahead and make those red. Not these, no, not that one. Alright, hopefully you can see these. If you can't, you know, maybe I'll go ahead and make them a different color, such as I need to maybe make them, it's hard to imagine what something might look like on your computer monitor, so I'm trying to pick as bright a color as possible. So let's go ahead and go for a super fluorescent, like orange color. That'll work. That should be visible to you, I hope. Alright, well I'm going to go ahead and exit out of isolation mode. And I'm going to go ahead and select the 2 children here, and I'm going to go ahead and bring up my material editor, and I'm going to go ahead and select the first material. I'm going to name this one root, because I want to make sure that the mesh that it's connected to, meaning this one here, is just for a visual tutorial purpose of being a different color, just so you grasp it. So I'm going to go ahead and make it like a light blue color. I'm going to go ahead and add it to there. Alright. And the next one I'm going to name kids. Those are the children. And I'll make them a darker blue color here. Let's add it to the children. Just like that. Now that cannot be mistaken with, I just added the materials to the meshes, not the actual point objects, because these point objects cannot have materials added to them, as you can see. Let's go ahead and close my material editor, and you'll notice I did name these. That is going to be a big part of what you turn in for the class, is how much you're paying attention on the technical side of this. I mean, if I open this up and I just see you have default 01 or default 02, it does reduce the grade a bit, because it does shows you didn't take the time professionally as a student and both someone who's taken this seriously in what you're doing and doing it the proper way. The way as if you might be working at a studio, as it is, because when you're working at a studio, you're not the only one to see these files. After you're done working on this, you'll hand it off, if you're primarily a rigger setting up the animation pipeline, you'll hand it off then to an animator, and they'll be working in your file also. So you got to make sure that things are set up correctly. So that being the case, I'm going to go ahead and stop this video of the basic setup, just so we can then go into our next one. And I want to keep these fairly short, because there's going to be about 4 or 5 of them just for this. So we'll set it up for that and move on to the next video.